Govannen, dear friends. Welcome to Middle-earth. We hope you're going to have a great time today, as we'll do a deep dive into the 25 most powerful elves from the Lord of the Rings lore. While most of it's going to be based on J.R.R. Tolkien's legendarium, we're also going to mention their portrayals in live-action movies and TV series. Elves are perhaps the most mystical and intriguing creatures in the Tolkien legendarium, having been conceived by Eru Iluvatar. Referred to as the Eldar, they are the fairest and wisest beings in Arda. They first awoke under the stars of Cuivienen and were divided into 3 tribes: Noldor, Vanyar, and Teleri. Out of these 3 tribes came some of the greatest and most powerful beings to have ever existed. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Fenor. Fenor was an Noldorian elf, the first child of Finway and the only child of Finway and Miriel. Feanor's birth brought both joy and grief to Finway, as he took away most of Miriel's energy when he was born. She grew tired to the point that her spirit left her body. Fenor was considered to be mighty in almost all ways. He was a craftsman and a warrior. The greatest of all his achievements were considered to be the Silmarils. Now, the Silmarils were 3 large jewels that contained the light of the 2 trees of Valinor. The sun and moon would later originate from the fruits of these 2 trees. Imagine that, creating jewels that had a bit of sun and moon in them. Fenor was praised for his creation of the Silmarils, but proud and selfish as he was, he came to covet them. He was not the only one to covet them, however, as Melkor, the evil Valar, a demigod, came to covet them and stole them away from him. Feanor's lust for the Silmarils made him follow Melkor to the Middle-earth and battle against his army. He was mortally wounded by Gothmog, a Balrog, and died. Fenor was amongst the greatest elves to have ever existed, and perhaps the most flawed elf to have ever existed as well. His desires led to his death and wreaked havoc along the way. In his quest to retrieve the Silmarils from Melkor, he not only went to his doom, but also caused a lot of bloodshed amongst his own kindred by rebelling against the Valar. Gadriel. Gadriel was a Noldorian elf, the youngest child of Finarfin and Eowyn. She was born in Valinor and went on to take part in the rebellion of the Noldor, as they left Valinor to establish and rule over their own lands in Middle-earth. While in Middle-earth, she came to be known for many great deeds. She was entrusted with one of the Rings of Power, Nenya. In the Third Age, it's widely known that she hosted and aided the Fellowship of the Ring. However, what's less known is that she herself defied Sauron many times, most notably when she used her formidable power to destroy his fortress, Dol Guldur. Galadriel was a very powerful elf, who was also known for her great beauty and wisdom. She's also been portrayed on screen many times. In the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies, Cate Blanchett played the role of Galadriel. Meanwhile, in the Rings of Power, where her character takes more of center stage, Morfydd Clark portrays her. Now, both of these interpretations have often been compared, and Clark has gotten the short end of the stick. However, it might also be said that Galadriel's character in the Rings of Power is more youthful, for the lack of a better word, and Clark does a decent job of bringing that side to life. Luthian. Luthian Tenuvial was a half-elf and half-Maya, as she was born to Thingol, the king of the Teleri, and Melian, a Maya. Luthian was considered to be the most beautiful of all of Eru Iluvatar's children. It was said that her voice broke the bitterness of winter, and flowers sprang as she danced. She was, however, best known for her love story with a mortal man, Beren. Beren fell in love with her when he saw her dancing in the woods, and soon Luthian reciprocated his love as well. However, her father, Thingol, was against their union and only agreed to get them married if Beren could win a Silmaril from Melkor. Beren and Luthian braved all the dangers that came with facing Melkor, as Beren cut off a Silmaril from his crown, while Luthian used her powers to put him to sleep. Quite a feat. However, after Beren died fighting against Melkor's wolf, Caracharoth, Luthian also passed away in grief. The spirit entered the halls of Mandos, where she sang a song of such beauty and sorrow that it even moved Mandos to pity, and she was given a choice between an immortal life and a mortal life with Beren. For her love of Beren, she chose a mortal life. Her choice intertwined the fates of elves and men like never before, and it's often been said that her bloodline will not perish.
You should have stayed dead.
Elrond. Elrond was a half-elf born to Arendelle and Elwing. Elrond also had a twin, Elros. Elrond and his brother were born in Middle-earth, but they were soon taken captive and raised by Maglor, one of the sons of Fëanor. While in the Middle-earth, Elrond came to be known for his many great deeds. For one, Elrond was fearless in battle against the forces of Sauron. In the last alliance of elves and men, he served as Gilgalad's herald. Gilgalad had also entrusted him with one of the rings of power, known as Vilya, which gave him many powers, and amongst them was the power to heal. Elrond would often use it in the service of the others, most notably to heal Frodo when he was struck with a Morgul knife by one of the Nazgûl. Elrond, while immensely powerful, was quite a tragic character as well. During his childhood, he and his brother were taken captive by Maglor. You see, their mother, Elwing, was in possession of a Silmaril, which made Feanor's sons come after them. Not willing to be taken captive, Elwing threw herself into the sea along with the Silmaril. So, most of their childhood was spent in captivity, and while they were treated as captives initially, Maglor did take pity on them later and raised them in a more loving manner. When Elrond and Elros were given the choice between the fate of elves or men, while Elrond chose to be an elf, his twin chose the fate of men and became the first king of Númenor and forever became lost to his kin. Elrond also lost his wife, Celebrian, when she was attacked by the orcs and left the Middle-earth after being unable to recover from it. By the end of the War of the Ring, Elrond had also lost his daughter, Arwen, when she chose a mortal life to be with her husband, Aragorn. Not for nothing does Tolkien describe him as a king crowned with many winters. Elrond, one of the beloved characters in Tolkien's legendarium, has been depicted on the screen as well. His character was played by Hugo Weaving in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies, and in the Rings of Power, where we get to see a more youthful Elrond, he's portrayed by Robert Aramayo. Fingolfin. Fingolfin was an Noldorian elf and the first child of Finway and his second wife, Indis. He was also Feanor's half-brother. Fingolfin followed his half-brother to Middle-earth, despite not being particularly keen on leaving Aman, the blessed lands that contained Valinor, amongst other realms, as he wished to uphold Feanor's place as the elder brother, and didn't want to be separated from his people either. Despite his respect toward Feanor, the latter had never been fond of Fingolfin and always mistrusted him. This mistrust made him burn down Fingolfin's ships on their journey to the Middle-earth, forcing them to reach Middle-earth via the dangerous Helcaraxë. Many of Fingolfin's people perished during the crossing, and Fingolfin was greatly dismayed with Feanor for his betrayal. Even in the Middle-earth, Feanor, being Feanor, became highly suspicious of Fingolfin. Nevertheless, Fingolfin became the High King of Noldor and set up the House of Fingolfin. He was considered to be strong and valiant, and even took on Melkor in single combat during Dagor Bragolac. It's been said that as he rode toward Angband, his wrath was so severe that many mistook him to be Orome, a Valar. Fingolfin shouted challenge after challenge, goading Melkor himself to come and fight him. Even the fearsome Melkor was said to be scared to face Fingolfin. Fingolfin smote Melkor with his sword many times, even when Melkor battled with a great hammer in his hands. Unfortunately, however, as valiant as he was, Fingolfin grew weary, and Melkor seized the opportunity to strike him to the ground 3 times. But even then, Fingolfin did not give up. He rose each time and tried to fight back. However, an elf, even as strong and valiant as Fingolfin, couldn't last against Melkor, and so he perished. Melkor didn't escape unscathed either, and walked with a limp ever after. Finway. Finway was the first king of Noldor. After the elves awoke under the stars in Cuivienen in the distant east of Middle-earth, Orome was the first amongst the Valar to find them. He spoke to them of Valinor's great beauty and urged them to travel there. But when the elves were not ready to believe him right away, Orome chose 3 ambassadors from the 3 tribes of the elves to come and visit Valinor, and Finway was one of them. Following his visit, he became responsible for leading his people to Valinor. Finway's strength lay in his leadership and loyalty. For instance, when his first son Feanor was exiled for a time by the Valar for threatening his half-brother Fingolfin, he joined Feanor in his exile. His legacy is also significant in the history of Middle-earth, as he was the father to great elves like Feanor, Fingolfin, and Finarfin, who played a crucial role in shaping the events of Middle-earth. Glorfindel. Glorfindel was a Noldor elf who dwelt in Gondolin during the First Age. When Gondolin eventually fell to Melkor, he battled bravely against Melkor's armies and also saved the lives of many elves while doing so. Unfortunately, he was slain by a Balrog, and his spirit passed to the halls of Mandos. As was common with many elves, he was re-embodied and allowed to stay in Valinor. However, something very different happened with Glorfindel that had never happened before. During the Second Age, Manwë, a Valar, sent him back to the Middle-earth and granted him powers as great as those of the Maiar. During this time, he battled against Sauron and his forces. Amongst his most well-known battles were his duel against the Witch King of Angmar in the Battle of Fornost. Glorfindel was also gifted with foresight. He was the one to predict that the Witch King would not die at the hands of a man. Remember the Witch King gloating to Éowyn that no man will ever be able to kill him? Well, we all know what happened next. Glorfindel's prophecy was fulfilled when Éowyn, a woman, and Merry, a hobbit, killed the Witch King. Glorfindel also aided Frodo during the War of the Ring. When Elrond sent people to look for Frodo, it was Glorfindel who found Frodo and the others. He also attacked and drove away some of the Nazgûl and put Frodo on his horse, Asfaloth, which then took him to Rivendell. Now, in the Fellowship of the Ring movie, this role was given to Arwen, but an interesting tidbit is that Joel Benson was credited for the role of Glorfindel in The Return of the King. Arendelle. Arendelle was a half-elf, born to Tuor, a man, and Idril, an elf. Amongst the first half-elves in Tolkien's legendarium, Arendelle was also amongst the mightiest, if not the mightiest, of them all. He was born and raised in Gondolin, and after the fall of Gondolin, he dwelt in Arvernian. He then married Elwing, the grandchild of Beren and Luthian, and had 2 sons with her, Elrond and Elros. During Arendelle's time in the Middle-earth, Melkor was wreaking havoc, and the forces of elves and men were unable to overcome him. So, Arendelle set sail for Valinor to plead with the Valar for their aid against Melkor. The Valar were so moved that Arendelle travelled all this way to speak for the others and heeded Arendelle's plea. The Valar then overthrew Melkor in the War of Wrath, and Arendelle himself slayed the great dragon Ancalagon the Black. It was amongst the mightiest acts ever known, as Ancalagon was no ordinary beast. He was the mightiest dragon, and fans have often said that even the mighty Godzilla might not stand a chance against him. Anyway, Arendelle and Elwing were given the choice of being elves or men, and while Arendelle's heart lay with the race of men, he chose to be an elf for his wife's sake. Arendelle was also destined to carry the Silmaril that was passed down to Elwing after it had been acquired by her grandfather, Beren. The Valar hallowed his ship, Vingalad, and Arendelle carried the Silmaril upon his brow. He then came to be known as Arendelle the Morning Star. In the end, it was his light that Galadriel gifted Frodo to use in dark places. Arendelle's light saved him in Shelob's lair 2 times. First, when he used it to defend himself against Shelob, and the second time when Samwise Gamgee used it to rescue Frodo from the lair.
Object for all Middle-earth.
Gilgalad. Gilgalad was an Noldorian elf who was also the last High King of the Noldor in the Middle-earth. The major part of his reign was during the Second Age, and he ruled over many realms. Gilgalad also maintained a very close relationship with men during this reign and formed the last alliance of elves and men in their war against Sauron. He fought beside Elendil, the king of Arnor and Gondor. Both of them were known for perhaps the bravest act during the war, and it's poignant for an elf and a man to have done it. You see, together they overthrew Sauron. While they were killed in the process, their feat played a crucial role in Isildur cutting off the One Ring from Sauron's hand, eventually bringing about his downfall. During his lifetime, Gilgalad also possessed one of the Rings of Power, Vilya, which passed to Elrond. Gilgalad has been featured in screen adaptations a number of times. He briefly appeared at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, where he was portrayed by Mark Ferguson. In the Rings of Power, Benjamin Walker plays the role of Gilgalad. Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor was an Eldorian elf who was born to Cuivienen and Nerdanel. Now, Cuivienen was one of the sons of Fëanor and was last in the line of Fëanor's descendants. While in Middle-earth, Celebrimbor ruled over Eregion. While Celebrimbor did fight in the War of Wrath against Melkor, he's best remembered for being a master smith, very much like Fëanor. However, very much unlike Fëanor, Celebrimbor was also known for his dignity and kindness. In the Second Age, Sauron had disguised himself as Anatar and managed to win over some elves, men, and dwarves. Under his guidance, Celebrimbor crafted 3 elven rings. When Sauron eventually revealed that he created the One Ring to control all the others, Celebrimbor defied him and created 3 rings for the elves, 9 rings for men, and 7 rings for the dwarves, none of which were corrupted by Sauron. Sauron captured and tortured Celebrimbor for this, wanting to know where the rings were, but Celebrimbor resisted the torment and never revealed the location of the rings. Celebrimbor appears in the Rings of Power. He's played by Charles Edwards. His character has been interpreted as a visionary artist who is well respected for his knowledge and skills in craftsmanship. Calborn. Calborn was a Sindar elf. In the Middle-earth, he first dwelt in Doriath, the land of Thingol. While in Doriath, he met and fell in love with Galadriel. They soon married and had a daughter, Celebrian, who would later marry Elrond. There's a running joke that should you ever feel useless, you only need to remember that Galadriel has a husband as well. Funny as it may be, it takes away from Celeborn in several ways. For one, when Sauron attacked Eregion, Celeborn led a defense against Sauron's army, and when their defenses fell, he went to Rivendell with Elrond to strengthen the elves' defenses. In the Third Age, he hosted the Fellowship of the Ring in Lothlorien, and provided them with the boats they needed for their journey down the river Anduin. The friendship between Galadriel and Gimli is often remembered from the Fellowship's time in Lothlorien. But what's often been forgotten is that Calborn had also welcomed Gimli despite his distrust of dwarves, something he'd harboured since their attack on Doriath during the First Age. After the War of the Ring, Calborn stayed in Middle-earth for a long time and later joined Galadriel in the Undying Lands. Calborn's been featured on the screen in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where his role has been played by Morten Sokus. However, his character has not been cast in the Rings of Power. Finrod. Finrod was an Noldorian elf, the eldest son of Finarfin and Irwen. He had two brothers, Angrod and Egnor, and a sister, Galadriel. When he dwelt in Middle-earth, he was the king of Nargothrond. Finrod was the first Noldor elf to come across men and had great love toward them. His close relationship with men and his willingness to learn about them led men to call him the friend of men. Moreover, despite the general distrust between elves and dwarves, Finrod was also friendly with the dwarves. In the First Age, Finrod battled against Melkor, and during one of these battles, Badahir, a mortal man, saved his life. Later, when Badahir's son Beren came to him for help in his quest to win the Silmaril for Luthian's hand, Finrod aided him and battled against Sauron. However, Sauron eventually prevailed and sent a wolf to devour him. When the wolf first went for Beren, Finrod killed it with his bare hands, but unfortunately succumbed to his wounds in the process. Finrod has been portrayed in the Rings of Power by Will Fletcher, and while he just appears sparingly, he's integral to Galadriel's storyline as he serves as an inspiration for her. Fingon. Fingon was an Noldorian elf who was the eldest son of Fingolfin and an heir. During the rebellion of the Noldor, he left along with his kin, and unfortunately had to participate in the first kinslaying amongst the elves as they were leaving Aman. He then crossed the threatening Helcaraxe along with his father. Fingon was amongst the bravest elves, and for this reason was also known as Fingon the Valiant. Despite the bad blood between the houses of Fëanor and Fingolfin, when Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, was taken to Thangorodrim and hung there by his wrist by Melkor's forces, Fingon saved him and brought him to his camp. Now, before this act, the claim of the High Kingship of Noldor was a matter of dispute between the houses of Fëanor and Fingolfin, as Fëanor was the eldest of Finway's sons. However, it was Fingon's bravery and kindness that made Maedhros relinquish his claim to the High Kingship of Noldor. It was then ceded to the House of Fingolfin. After Fingon became the High King of Noldor, his lands were invaded by Melkor and his forces. Despite being outnumbered, Fingon battled hard. Unfortunately, it was betrayal from within the ranks that had him surrounded and killed.
You are the oldest and wisest of our kind, and the elves are facing our greatest...
Círdan was born as Nawe and was one of the Teleri. When his kin, most notably Elwë, disappeared during the journey, despite his desire to see Valinor, Círdan stayed back and looked for Elwë. During this time, Círdan started building ships and soon came to be known as Círdan the Shipwright. However, he received a message from the Valar that none of his ships would endure the voyage for a long time. It was then that he saw a vision of the ship Vingalad, Arendelle's ship. He stayed behind and became the lord of the Teleri. When Melkor and his forces wreaked havoc in the Middle-earth during the First Age, he aided in many battles and also offered refuge. When Arendelle wished to sail to Valinor to seek the aid of the Valar in their fight against Melkor, he helped him in building the greatest ship ever known, Vingalad, based on the vision he'd seen before. In the Second Age, he dwelt in the Grey Havens. Having the gift of foresight, he warned against the creation of the Rings of Power, and later went on to receive the Ring of Fire, Narya, which he gave to Gandalf when he arrived in the Middle-earth. Círdan and his elves also joined the last alliance of elves and men, where he was the lieutenant of Gilgalad. In the Third Age, Círdan aided men in their fight against Sauron. After the War of the Ring, Círdan dwelt in the Middle-earth into the Fourth Age and was amongst the last elves to sail to the Undying Lands. He was the oldest elf in the Middle-earth. Círdan has been portrayed on the screen by Michael Ellsworth and only appears sparingly in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Legalis. Legalis was a Sindar elf. He was the son of the elven king of Mirkwood, Thranduil. In the Third Age, Legalis attended the Council of Elrond in Rivendell and then went on to become a representative of the elves in the Fellowship of the Ring. Legalis played a major role in the Fellowship's journey and in the War of the Ring, as he was gifted with keen eyesight and sharp hearing. He was also an excellent archer. During his time with the Fellowship, he developed a great friendship with Aragorn and Gimli. In fact, his friendship with Gimli was most poignant and endearing, given the general differences between elves and dwarves. He stayed in the Middle-earth till Aragorn's death and then built a ship and departed for the Undying Lands. He was accompanied on this journey by Gimli, and Gimli became the only dwarf to reach the Undying Lands. Legolas has been a major character in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies, where Orlando Bloom played the role. His role was quite a hit with the viewers and established his career as well. Thranduil. Thranduil was a Sindar elf and was the only son of Orofa. In the Second Age, Orofa and Thranduil participated in the War of the Last Alliance against Sauron and his army. Orofa was slain in this war, and the kingship of the Woodland Realm passed to Thranduil. Thranduil was a mighty elf. In the Third Age, when Sauron extended his influence in the Woodland Realm from Dol Guldur, Thranduil led the elven forces against his orcs and wargs in the Battle of the Five Armies. Fighting alongside men and dwarves, they prevailed against Sauron. During this time, he developed a kind of respect for the dwarves and even went on to place Thorin Oakenshield's sword on his tomb after he was slain in the battle. He also became close to Bilbo Baggins, Frodo's uncle, and Gandalf during this time. During the War of the Rings, Thranduil sent his son Legalis to Rivendell, who went on to play a crucial role. Thranduil stayed in Middle-earth into the Fourth Age, and his realm flourished even during this period. Whether he left for the Undying Lands later on or not is not known. Thranduil was amongst the leading characters in the Hobbit trilogy, and was portrayed by Lee Pace in the Hobbit trilogy, which was very well received by the viewers. Haldir. Haldir was an elf who resided in Lothlorien. When Fellowship of the Ring reached Lothlorien, he guided them to Caras Galadon, where they met Calborn and Galadriel. After that, he went back to protecting the northern borders. Now, the character of Haldir was only a minor character in the books. However, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where his role was played by Craig Parker, his role was extended. Haldir was the elf who led elven armies to Rohan to aid them in their fight against Saruman's armies. He was wounded as he directed his elves back to safety and died in Aragorn's arms. Arondir. Arondir is the first elf on this list who is not a Tolkien creation. He's amongst the most notable elves from Amazon's Rings of Power, where the role is played by Ismael Cruz Cordova. Arondir was an elf from the Second Age and was stationed in the Southlands. While there, he met and fell in love with a mortal woman, Bronwyn. Their love was one of those rare romances between the races of elves and men. Arondir was a brave elf who fearlessly confronted orcs and protected those in the Southland to the best of his abilities. Besides his physical strength, he was also known for his tactical thinking abilities and resilience. Now, Arondir's character did draw criticism at the beginning, especially from the purists. Despite this, Arondir's character was amongst the best received characters from the Rings of Power, and a major credit for this goes to the actor and his heartwarming romance with Bronwyn, don't you think? Arwen. Arwen was a half-elf and the only daughter of Elrond and Celebrian. She was the most beautiful elf who still resided in the Middle-earth and was said to bear a close resemblance to her ancestor, Luthian Tenuviel. Like Luthian, she also fell in love with a mortal man, Aragorn. However, Elrond was only ready to get her married to Aragorn if he became the king of Arnor and Gondor. Aragorn, for his part, accepted Elrond's condition and went through hell and back to win Arwen's hand. This included becoming a ranger, aiding Frodo in his journey toward Mordor, and even playing a crucial role in the War of the Ring. Arwen, for her part, always watched over Aragorn and was a source of constant inspiration and support. After the War of the Ring, when Aragorn became the king of Arnor and Gondor, she married Aragorn and became the queen of the reunited kingdom. In doing so, she gave up her immortality for a life with him. Arwen later on gave up her place on the ship to the Undying Lands as a gift to Frodo, so that he could heal from the trials he'd faced on his quest to destroy the One Ring. Arwen's strength lies in her love and commitment to Aragorn, for whom she even gave up her immortality and the hope of ever being reunited with her kin in the Undying Lands. Arwen was featured in the Lord of the Rings trilogies, where her role was played by Liv Tyler. While a minor character in Tolkien's Legendarium, her role was extended in the movies. For instance, in the Fellowship of the Ring, she brought a wounded Frodo to Rivendell. She even chased away the Nazgul when they followed her by summoning a flood upon them. Now, that's more like our brave heroine. Tauriel. Tauriel is another elf on this list who's not a Tolkien creation. She was a wood elf who was portrayed by Evangeline Lilly in the Hobbit trilogy. Tauriel was a captain of the Mirkwood Elven Guard who was known to be a warrior and a leader. The first time we see her chasing away giant spiders and rescuing the dwarf Kili. She also travels with Legolas and Bilbo to warn the dwarves of an upcoming attack by Bolg, an orc leader. In the Battle of the Five Armies, she battles Bolg alongside Kili and is almost overpowered by him when Kili sacrifices his life to save her. Bolg is later killed by Legolas. What happens to Tauriel after the events of the Battle of the Five Armies is not known. It's been speculated that she returned to Mirkwood. Unlike Arondir, Tauriel's character was not very well received by the viewers. A lot of viewers were turned off by her romance with Kili, as a romance between an elf and dwarf was most unlikely going by the lore. Others felt that her character was rather superfluous to the storyline. However, to be fair, the romance in itself was delicately handled, and the actress did a fine job with what she was given. Ecthelion. Ecthelion was a great elf lord who resided in Gondolin. He arrived in the Middle-earth via the dangerous crossing of the Helcaraxe. So it can be said that he was loyal to Fingolfin and later to Turgon once the High Kingship of Noldor passed to him. Ecthelion was known to have played a role in some of the major events, such as allowing Tuor to enter Gondolin. Tuor, in turn, would warn Turgon regarding the fall of Gondolin. Ecthelion also participated in several battles in the First Age, like the Battle of the Lamoth and Dagor Aglareb. However, it was during the fall of Gondolin that Ecthelion's bravery shone the most. He led his people into the battle and wreaked havoc amongst the ranks of the enemy. He even took on Gothmog the Balrog single-handedly. While he perished in the fight, neither he nor his bravery were ever forgotten. In fact, his deeds against Melkor's forces during the First Age are amongst the most heroic tales told in the Middle-earth. Thingol. Elu Thingol was born as Elwë and was a Teleri elf. Elwë was born in Cuivienen and was one of the elves chosen to travel with Orome to Valinor. Upon his return, he convinced others to travel to Valinor. However, many of the Teleri stayed back and didn't leave the Middle-earth, and Elwë himself became lost. It's been said that he was drawn to Melian, a Maya, as she was singing in the woods. Then, when he took her hand, a spell came upon them, and they stayed like that for many years. Later, when he returned with Melian as his wife, they became the king and queen of Doriath and had a daughter, Luthian. Under his rule, Doriath became a powerful realm. Thingol managed to secure his realm via the Girdle of Melian, a magical barrier set up by his wife, which stopped anyone from entering the realm without Thingol's permission. He even developed alliances with the dwarves during this reign. However, Thingol is best known for his role in Beren and Luthian's story. He insisted on Beren winning a Silmaril from Melkor's crown as a bride price for Luthian's hand. Beren would eventually accomplish this and present the Silmaril to Thingol. Having acquired something that was unachievable, Thingol came to covet the Silmaril, something that would lead him to his doom. Now, the Nauglamir was a dwarven necklace and was one of the finest treasures in Doria. After having acquired the Silmaril, he called upon the dwarves to set the Silmaril in the Nauglamir, but their greed for the Silmaril became so strong that the dwarves killed Thingol for it. Turgon. Turgon was an Noldorian elf. He was the son of Fingolfin and Anaire, and brother to Fingon, Arathel, and Argon. He reached the Middle-earth via the dangerous Helcaraxe, like most of his kin. In the First Age, he became the High King of Noldor after his brother Fingon's death. Turgon founded Gondolin. For centuries, managed to keep himself and his people hidden from Melkor and his forces. And so, Gondolin became a stronghold for Noldor. During his time in Middle-earth, Turgon participated in different battles against Melkor and inflicted great damage upon the enemy. However, it was the interesting mix of his pride and kindness that ultimately led to his downfall. You see, when Tuor, a mortal man, warned him of the fall of Gondolin in his pride, he didn't heed this warning. Then, when his sister Arathel came to Gondolin along with her son, Maeglin, he welcomed them with open arms and took Maeglin under his protection, an act of kindness that would later prove to be very costly. You see, Maeglin desired Turgon's daughter, Idril. However, she fell in love and married Tuor, a man. Maeglin was so overcome with envy that he betrayed Gondolin's location to Melkor. When Melkor attacked Gondolin, Turgon fought valiantly against his forces. However, he was ultimately slain. Even after his death, his strength, wisdom, and majesty as a leader were never forgotten. His legacy also became significant, as it was Arendelle, his grandson, who ultimately brought about Melkor's downfall. Maeglin. Maeglin was the son of Eol and Arathel. While he's infamous for betraying the location of Gondolin to Melkor, his strengths are more or less forgotten. Now, his mother, Arathel, was the daughter of Fingolfin and Anaire, and sister to Fingon, Turgon, and Argon. She became lost after she met Eol as he cast enchantments to stop her from escaping the forest where he first laid his eyes on her. However, she eventually managed to arrive at Gondolin along with Maeglin. Her brother, Turgon, welcomed them both with open arms. Maeglin went on to become a mighty elf in Gondolin and battled alongside Turgon. He also showcased his architectural skills by enhancing Gondolin's defenses. For instance, he designed the Great Gate of Steel, which was Gondolin's seventh and last gate. However, it was his desire for Idril, Turgon's daughter, that ultimately led to him betraying his own. Maeglin greatly desired Idril. However, as Idril was his first cousin, they were very close in kinship to be considered eligible for marriage. Moreover, Idril despised his desire for her. In fact, she fell in love with and married Tuor, a man. Blinded by envy, Maeglin committed treachery and betrayed Gondolin's location to Melkor, which ultimately led to its fall. Ingwe. Ingwe was a Vanyar elf, a High King of the Elves and the King of Vanyar. He was born in Cuivienen and was one of the elves chosen by Orome to travel to Valinor. After having seen the glory of Valinor, he encouraged his people to travel there. Under his guidance, the Vanyar were amongst the first elves to reach and settle in Valinor. Finway was known for his leadership and his relationship with the Valar, something that is revered amongst the elves. His legacy was also significant as his son Ingwion led the Vanyar in the War of Wrath against Melkor, the war that ultimately led to Melkor's downfall. Marvelous verdict. So, there we are, folks, with our list of the 25 most powerful elves in Tolkien legendarium. Quite a comprehensive list it is, too. Most of the elves on this list are remembered for their great feats. However, some are more, let's say, complex. Anyway, do you like the list? Is there anything else you wish to add? Please let us know in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.